Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this March 31st meeting of the Charlotte City Council Budget and Governance Committee. My name is Ed Driggs. I chair the committee, and we'll start with introductions. Would other members of the committee please introduce themselves?
Good afternoon, Julie Eisel, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large.
Greetings, my name is Greg Phipps, serving at large committee member. Nice to be here on this stormy day.
Good afternoon, Dimple Ajmera, Vice Chair.
And Mr. Bakari is not here yet, so could we have introductions around the table in the room, please?
Good afternoon, Brent Cagle, Assistant City Manager.
Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Angela Charles, Charlotte Water Director.
Chad Howe, Charlotte Water CFO.
Mike Davis with Stormwater Services.
And anybody online other than the committee members?
John Lewis, Katz.
Blanche Sherman, Katz.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Haley
Gentry, Airport.
Mike Hill, Airport CFO.
Teresa. Yes. Anybody else? Good. So we have, we're basically going to preview the budget workshop today, and I think I'll ask Mr. Cagle to just run us quickly through the agenda.
Yes, sir. We have a great agenda today. We have 3 items. One will be budget outlook from Charlotte Water and Stormwater. The second item will be the FY 2023 CATS outlook. And the third item will be the 2023 Aviation Department outlook.
Good. Why don't we go then straight to Ms. Charles for the Charlotte Water outlook.
Thank you, Chairman Driggs and Vice Chair Ajmera and committee members. Again, I am Angela Charles, Director of Charlotte Water, and we thank you for the opportunity to share the budget outlook for what we're calling the One Water funds. That would be Stormwater and Charlotte Water. So we're going to begin with Mike Davis, and he's going to give you an update on Stormwater.
All right. Good afternoon. Good to be with you. Make sure we're loading the right presentation. But maybe while we're switching over, I was going to just comment that Councilmember Phipps noted it's stormy today. It seems like anytime we do a budget committee presentation for stormwater, it seems to rain. And I was going to point out, as we think about what our utility does and sort of the purpose of it, on a day like today, just to kind of give you some context, we've gotten anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches of rain. So if you think about 1.5 inches, kind of on average, that's about like filling up Bank of America Stadium 24 times and then tipping it over. And so one way to think about what it is that we do is just trying to figure out how do we take that water in any given rain event, make sure this clicker's working, and think about how do we make sure that we're not flooding and relieve safety conditions associated with, in particular, roadway flooding. And 2, as that water reaches streams and creeks, that we're getting it there in the cleanest way possible. And increasingly, as we think about our work, focusing on equity in that delivery of services to our community. So in the remainder of the presentation I've got for you today, it's just 5 slides to talk about really the 4 biggest drivers kind of going into FY 2023 that shape our budget proposal. And I'll start with one, covers a lot of ground, and I'll try to kind of unpack this, but I want to start by noting kind of in the top left this completing major capital projects. And it's something that we don't talk a lot about when we come before City Council, but about half of our capital investment are in these large scale, what you might call comprehensive storm drainage improvements. Oftentimes they're on the scale of whole neighborhoods, and they might seek to sort of comprehensively replace whole drainage systems, upsize them, or replace just deteriorating pipe. It's a big part of our business. But I wanted to say that first because what we move into next is the part that we really have talked a lot about over the last few years, and I just wanted to give you the update, and it's about the repair backlog. And so many of you will remember that kind of going into the time frame of the FY 2020 budget, we were at a place where we were taking in more work in a given year than we had the resources to resolve in a given year. And so what that had meant was building a backlog. And by the time that we were really confronting that going into the FY 2020 budget, I think many of you will remember that a resident who might call seeking some sort of relief was told that it would be 7 years or more before we could even assign a project to investigate it and work on it. And so what that really began for us in FY 2020 was what we've gone on to call a 5-year surge to really attack that backlog, but importantly also kind of reshape the structure of our stormwater program in terms of what we qualify for work, how we prioritize and categorize that work, but also increase our ability to complete those projects. And so over that 5 years, with the goal of being to retire 1,690 projects, that would be an 83% increase in our productivity. So as we come into this budget year, that would be the 4th of those 5 years. And I'd say we're in a very good place. We're tracking very well on that target. And the chart that you have to the right just kind of shows the status of what had been the 1,690 unassigned projects that was that sort of 7-year wait list has been cut down to 400 remaining, and we would expect to have those assigned and underway in the remainder of those 2 years of the 5-year surge. So that's all very good news. I do want to point out that just because that backlog goes away doesn't mean we're done with that kind of work. Things will still break, and we will still be actively repairing things, and we still in a given year will get about 3,000 calls for service in a given year. So there's always going to be lots to do. And the last thing I wanted to point out on this slide is just this look ahead. This is something that affects us. I think it affects other departments of the city as well, but that is just a growing concern about construction materials availability. It was something that was a growing concern in terms of how COVID has impacted the market, and it has increasingly become a concern with events in Europe. So we think it will impact just how contractors are able to procure materials and what they're going to ultimately charge us for some of those materials as well. So that was a lot on that slide, a little less to say about this one, but I'll segue it by saying everything on that former slide was about installing things that are broken or need to be upsized. This is really thinking about where are we going as a program, and it's about moving into proactive maintenance. And there's really 2 key concepts here. The first is that we really have had to understand where our assets are in order to take good care of them. And remember that Stormwater Services inherited most of its infrastructure. The program is not quite 30 years old. Most of the infrastructure we've taken on is a lot older than that. And so it's only been in the last fiscal year that we now have complete inventory of the system. And the reason we would want to know that is because now we can start to understand what those assets need in terms of intervention. That chart in the top right bears a lot of resemblance to one you saw in a former budget committee presentation around street resurfacing. It's a very similar concept. The idea is if you can provide investments within the life of an asset, you can extend the useful life of it. It is a more cost-effective way to maintain that asset over time. But understand that is new frontier for us. That's where we are going as we move out of this sort of 5-year surge way of doing our work. And then lastly, you'll just note there's this goal to replace 1% of the system per year. That would just be kind of an industry benchmark. And right now we're at about 0.5% of that. So we'll be seeking to grow that capacity as we sort of mature as a utility. All right, the third major driver is our surface water quality program. I would tell you that there's 2 things about this. One, it's important that we do surface water quality investments because it is the right thing to do for our environment. We also must do it under the Federal Clean Water Act, and it's tied to how stormwater services started as a utility. So on the left there, you just see some things that we do in terms of our services in this program of work. What I would draw your attention to is in the lower right, and that is to tell you that we are regulated by North Carolina DEQ to make sure that we are compliant with our permit that ensures that we're delivering as clean a water as we can, that runs off across the city and after rain events, that it's reaching our streams as clean as it can be. So NCDEQ is going around the state, have been for a couple years, doing audits of communities that hold these permits, and we expect to receive our audit this year, this calendar year. You should know that your surface water quality program is very strong. We expect the audit to reflect that, but we also expect, like any audit, we'll find some things that they'll suggest we'll need to improve upon, and we will certainly do that. All right, and then the last of the four big drivers I want to talk about is just growth pressure. We have not, development pressure really has been unrelenting. We continue to grow, and that's a good thing, and we would acknowledge that we support the economic growth associated with land development, and it is also true that as that happens, it increases the amount of runoff that the system receives as fields become parking lots and structures and other things. So when you see those kind of bullets up at the top, those are kind of our goals with land development activity, trying to make sure that what we take on as new infrastructure, we can maintain it. We're trying to mitigate new impacts of that land development. And make sure we're not burdening the sort of environmental aspects of that water quality as well. And so what I'd say from a budget perspective is in any given year, what we're trying to do is sustain our level of service. We feel good that we provide good responsive service to the industry, but we have to scale that in accordance with the level of development activity that's out there, and this budget proposal is able to do that in a way that holds our fees constant, but scales with the growth that we have been seeing. And then the last thing is just a note that the UDO is a strategic frontier for us. We've been closely partnering with development industry and planning department as we try to update and modernize our development regulations, because the way that the city developed over the last 20 years is not the way it has been developing in the last few years. It is more infill, and a lot of things that have been built had just simply fall through the gaps in our former regulations. So we are looking forward to having those become updated. The last slide I have for you is just to talk a little bit about our financial planning. Everything on the left, which I think I'll just kind of read through real quick. It's important to understand where our funding comes from and what we do with it. But it comes from the regular utility bill, the water bill. Everybody who owns property pays the same amount on a square foot of impervious basis. What we do with it then is we take that revenue and we model over 10 years kind of what capacity that gives us, match that against our priorities, work with finance and the budget office, and ultimately a financial consultant to make sure we've got a model that we think is sustainable. So a 1% increase based on where we are would sort of correlate to about a 13-cent per month or less increase to about 90% of single-family homeowners, just as a way of kind of understanding what that means. And then on the right, you'll just see that has been the plan that we have been working within when we started that surge that I mentioned earlier. And what I would say in any given budget year, and it's the same here, is that we are working to hit that model, and we would ultimately bring that forward as part of the city manager's budget recommendation, which we'll see later in the process. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you have.
So I have two hands up, but just to be clear, Mike, what you're saying is that you expect your TBD there will be in the range of the model. Is that right?
Yeah, what I would say is we would expect it to be within a few tenths of a percent either way of what we're projecting there, which was the 3.6 projected.
Right. I think given that the backlog looked like $1 billion problem a few years ago, it's amazing that you have managed to get that under control. I just wanted to commend you on that. And I have a question from the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Mike. I can imagine on days like this, you're just wanting to stay away from the phone or email because you're inundated. I do have a question. If you go back to the slide that said that at the moment you're able to do 0.5%, your goal is to go to 1%. Could you go back to that?
I am okay, let's see. I think it's right here. Yes.
To replace 1% of the system per year. Currently, you're replacing 0.5%. So that's double what you're able to do now. What is going to what is it going to take for you all to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is you shouldn't assume that it requires doubling investment in the program. Keep in mind that our current state is one in which we are responding to things that people have pointed out to us are broken. So we are not doing that proactive maintenance that we're trying to move into. So we're going to be retiring quite a bit of what we might call private property assistance work that does give us some capacity as we retire those types of projects to begin investing, but not investing in things that hopefully have already broken, or hopefully not in things that are already broken, but in things that we can do interventions on in what we would call that proactive maintenance. I'm not sure if I made all that make sense, but the point is we're going to stop doing a certain kind of work that was reactive and reinvest that into things that are proactive. So as we go forward over the next couple of years, we're going to see that number pick up. I don't know yet what that investment is going to be. My goal would be that as we finish out that 5-year surge, that we'll begin to be having those insights about what does a sort of steady state look like for us that maintains those assets the way they need to be maintained in a proactive way. So I know I'm not answering your question. I would admit that that's part of our learning over the next couple years as we transition out of this sort of reactive way of doing work.
Okay. And then my last question. I'm sorry, I just forgot it. I was listening to what you were saying. I think that's fine. If I have anything else, I'll just get a hold of you. Thank you.
Sure.
And just further to that, is a 1% replacement rate suggests that the pipes have a 100-year use life. Is that actually?
Yeah, that's exactly what that's rooted in, and you can certainly appreciate that not every pipe makes it to 100 years. It has a lot to do with how it's installed and other conditions that it's endured. Some certainly can go longer, but that's the genesis of it, is a 100-year life expectancy out of the pipe.
Okay, I have Mr. Phipps.
Mr. Driggs, I remembered real quickly what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
That's okay. Mike, do you have an update on what happened with state legislation regarding stormwater that could impact you guys? Did that pass?
So there's been a variety of, over the years, I would say there's been a variety of various legislative things. Maybe the way I would summarize this is to say that the things that could have caused us any real concern in the last couple of years have not come to pass. But what everybody needs to understand that has really impacted us as a program that we have had to respond to goes back to 2018. And what it basically means is as development, if redevelopment happens, if you take something that already had impervious surface on it and it redevelops, we can no longer require treatments be applied to a redeveloped site to achieve water quality and flood mitigation goals. And so what that leaves us with is a legacy of decades of development that inundate downstream properties that we no longer can mitigate except for ourselves. So on the legislative front, that is very important to us. We hope that will one day change. But in terms of recent legislative activity, nothing has come to pass that's any real threat to our utility.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Phipps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo your comments, your congratulatory comments to the team for reducing that backlog. I mean, that's an amazing feat. I think it's worthy of more publicity. But the question I had centered around growth pressures. I was wondering, I've noticed in the last couple of rezoning sessions that we've had, there's been a couple of several petitions that we discussed that they would have to, water availability, hookups or whatever, needed some attention. And I was wondering, given Charlotte Water's current schedule, or production schedule, maintenance schedule, how much of those types of activities to get developers, compliant with water availability and capacity, how much does that would it impact your schedule? I noticed in some of those things that they would have to pay for it or whatever, but I guess you would have to be involved somehow in the design and supervision of that. I was just wondering how would that affect, or has that been a problem in the past, really?
So, Mr. Phipps, when you use the word water availability, I think what you're probably referring to is on the water, wastewater utility side. So Director Charles might want to answer that. What I'll say from a stormwater perspective is there really is not a availability component. There's never a time when someone wouldn't be able to develop because of their stormwater impacts. So our role is to try to mitigate that as best we can, and we would want to keep pace with whatever that level of development pressure is. You want to answer now?
Sure. In terms of water availability or wastewater availability, that's what our planning section does. That is their responsibility. And in the proposed budget and in our capital program, you'll see a certain amount of funds dedicated to increasing capacity. So that's where the planning comes in. So we are water and wastewater planning is integrated in city planning, county planning, and planning in the towns to make sure that we are ahead of development as much as possible. Now, there are pockets sometimes where development occurs faster than the projections. And so that may be what you are referencing, but there's a very robust planning process that occurs continuously. That's part of what our planning group does to make sure that we have the availability in our community. And what I say to folks is look around. Look at the growth. Now, with everything beginning with water and wastewater, I think that's a reflection of some darn tootin' good, is that a word? Good planning that has occurred in our community because the infrastructure had to be there to support the growth.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
So I think that's a segue into the water portion. I just wanted to ask whether, as you look at that 3.6% increase over the surge period, do we have any visibility on what the likely need is going to be for rate increases going beyond that graph, that slide?
Not yet. I won't get way down in the weeds on this, but I'll just say that what we hope to do over this coming summer is spend a lot of time trying to build some new assumptions that are rooted in an asset management and proactive management approach. So meaning as we transition out of these 5 years, we can start to build for ourselves and for you all what we think a steady state, well-maintained utility really starts to look like. And I would just say going into that exercise, the way that we would want to do that is to try to solve for that in a way that doesn't require any significant rate increases. We'll go where the math points us, but that would be the goal.
Okay, thanks. So a committee, I think our major takeaway here is that 3.5-ish% increase in line with prior years and on average below the trajectory that we had established of 3.6% every year and well below the trajectory that we identified that we thought might be necessary to clear up the backlog. So we have really done well to get to this place. And if I have no other questions from the committee, I think we should move straight on to water. Ms. Charles?
Thank you, Chairman Driggs. And we can proceed to the Charlotte water slides. And Chad's going to drive for me. Okay, are we moving? Oh, it's got to load, okay. There we go. If we can go to the next slide. I always like to begin with the mission and vision. And if you look at the mission and vision on a very high level, we want to continue being one of the leading water utilities in the nation, dedicated to our people, our community, region, and environment. And we have 3 tenets of our mission. One is infrastructure for the future. Sustainability, that's how we sustain what we have and maintain regulatory compliance. And then equity and inclusion is another tenet of what that's interwoven into our mission and our vision. I want to take a moment to talk about performance during the pandemic. We have experienced shortages due to the Great Resignation, and also our folks, we also experienced shortages due to folks being out with COVID. What remained was our goal and the requirements placed on the utility to meet regulatory requirements, and our folks, the Charlotte Water team, performed very, very well. We distributed 39.6 billion gallons of water with perfect compliance. That's in the middle of dealing with COVID and dealing with staff shortages. We were also recognized nationally. NACWA is the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. Every Charlotte Water wastewater plant qualified and was presented an award. This picture is from last November, and our largest plant has 14 years of perfect compliance. That's unheard of. And so the whole point here is that even throughout the pandemic and the challenges that we've had, the Greater Charlotte Water team band together and the utility continue to perform well. This next slide is a One Water slide. It represents One Water, and when I say the term One Water, that's water, wastewater, and stormwater investments in the corridors of opportunity. And so currently, in this past year, over $200 million was invested in the corridors of opportunity throughout the city. The proposed budget is $534 million, and we have, what are the drivers? The drivers would be increases in regulatory requirements. Of course, Councilmember Phipps, we just talked about capacity. We also have a rehab driver. That is, how do we rehabilitate and maintain what we have? And then increases in fuel and power and chemical costs. The budget split is 1/3 operating, 2/3 dedicated to capital, and then this year we will have enhancements related to economic development, safe and healthy communities, and mobility, accessibility, and connectivity of our system. The proposed capital investment program is $2.65 billion, with $1.4 billion dedicated to capacity for growth. Now, capacity is connected to regulatory requirements. So our requirements dictate that we have to have capacity to be able to serve and to hook people up, as Councilmember Phipps asked previously. So when you see, the majority, 54% of the capital program dedicated to capacity, just know there's a connection there to our regulatory requirements. And then the other large bucket would be rehabilitation and replacement projects of our existing system. Charlotte Water has been around since the late 1800s. We have some very usable pipe that was put in the 20s, but as our utility gets older, the community gets older, we have to dedicate funds and we have to have projects to rehab our pipelines and also rehab our treatment plants, water and wastewater treatment plants. The other side of the slide is something very, very new. We had a consultant to come in, and what we're trying to do here is to quantify the economic impact of water and water projects to our region. And I think that's important as we continue to invest and reinvest in our water and wastewater system. There is really an impact economically to this region. So I'll read a couple of them to you. 7,000 jobs will be supported the next 5 years with our capital program. 246,000 jobs created in water-dependent industries in the 6-county region with our FY21 program. $30.9 billion in economic output contributed to Mecklenburg County by water-dependent industries, and $46.5 billion contributed economically to the 6-county region by water-dependent industries. Now, why do we say 6-county regions? Charlotte Water has connections to every county adjacent to Mecklenburg County, including South Carolina. So when we look at the economic impact of our utility, it's much more than I think folks in our community realize. Financial planning, we have a model, we have a plan, and we try as much as possible to support and stick with the plan. We're working with finance, and at some point our manager will have a final recommendation. Right now, the model is, the projected 3.57. We're somewhere between 3.5 and 3.75. Again, maintaining the AAA rating is very important. It's much more important than I think I realized. I was in a meeting with some folks from DEQ about funding coming to the state of North Carolina for infrastructure. And so, again, I was talking about, well, how are funds distributed? And we get quite a few state revolving loan funds. And one thing that was said to me is, we look at the ratings of utilities in North Carolina when we decide to approve utilities for low-rate funding. And so by Charlotte Water being a AAA funded utility, we are definitely viewed favorably. This next slide is a rate comparison. We are in the middle. You see Greensboro on the far end, Birmingham, Atlanta on the top end of the chart. We are below Raleigh in terms of, some folks like to say, well, where is Raleigh? We are below Raleigh with the proposed increase. The whole purpose here is to show how competitive our utility is regionally and also on a national level. To the far right, we continue. This is part of our well-managed government. Charlotte Water has several ISO certifications. What that means is we apply private sector principles to run into the utility to remain competitive, and also other accreditations where we have folks from the outside coming in to view the utility to look at our practices. And so this last slide is from Hidden Valley Elementary School, which is in one of the opportunity corridors, and our One Water folks got together and did a holiday giveaway where each class member, and this is the kindergarten class at Hidden Valley Elementary, received presents, coats. Each one of them got coats and toys from our Charlotte Water and Stormwater folks. But this really reminds us, when I look at this picture, it reminds me why we do what we do. And so when we think about water, it's really about service to the community, service to these little ones here on this slide. And so the budget that both of the funds are proposing and our city manager will be presenting formally really supports what we need to do out in the community. So that is all I have, Chairman Driggs.
Thank you, Ms. Charles. I don't see any hands up. Are there any questions from the committee?
Yes,
If not-
Chairman,
Yes.
yes, I have a few questions. So, Ms. Charles, can you go back to the slide where you talk about a certain percentage goes, this slide, goes to our capacity for growth? How do we balance the growth with our operational dollars?
Yes, well, it's an internal prioritization, and that is an excellent question. And there's always competition between the two. Now, our engineers have complicated algorithms that they use to look at our assets to determine when something should be rehabbed and/or replaced. And we bounce that against the need for capacity and new infrastructure because it's tied to regulatory requirements. And on some level, both of them are tied to regulatory because with the federal lead and copper rule, right, and that's about existing pipeline and systems and how utilities are rehabbing those, funding has to be dedicated. So there's always been an internal prioritization and struggle. As long as we are a growing community, we will have to have a certain amount dedicated to capacity because if we don't, it becomes a regulatory issue and then, we won't be able to connect folks to our water and wastewater system. Now, one thing that we've done, Councilmember Ashmere, we did add an extra $20 million in the budget. We're proposing an additional $20 million for pipeline rehab. And that is, again, an effort to increase investment into what we have in our system. Now, and I'm gonna throw this number is mind-boggling, but when you look at One Water here, water, wastewater, and stormwater, we have over 11,000 miles of pipeline in this community that we have to maintain. And so having a robust capital program to take care of the needs we have is just pretty important. It's a priority.
Thank you, Ms. Charles. So the reason I bring up this question is we have had a major rehab issue. I think it was on our main line.
Okay.
So I'm trying to understand, and I know that was last year or late last year. I don't remember the exact time frame, but I know the question about rehabilitation had come up.
Yes.
And are we investing enough in that, right?
Yes.
While also balancing our other priorities, especially our capacity for growth. Well, keep in mind that I've heard great things from development community about how Charlotte is so forward-looking when it comes to capacity for growth. But I just want to make sure we are not doing it at the cost of rehabilitating our other and replacement projects.
Yes, ma'am, and we are right there with you, and specifically, we've added an additional $20 million in the budget for pipeline rehab. Now, in terms of, when I showed the slide about the external certifications, we benchmark ourselves against other utilities in the nation, and we fare very well. So in terms of water main breaks, the benchmark is 15 per 100 miles. Charlotte Water is 11.8 per 100 miles. So in some arenas, we look very well, but we can't stop there. It is what's important for our community. and what is the long-term investment. And so we do believe that this budget moves us closer, and as time goes on, I expect for those percentages to change between the two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Phipps, we have Katz next, and the Mayor Pro Tem is constrained for time. Can you ask a question later, or do you have something quickly now?
I can ask my question later, so no problem.
I appreciate that, thank you. So if there are no other questions, why don't we move on to Katz? Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Budget and Governance Committee. My name is John Lewis. I'm Executive Director of the Charlotte Area Transit System, and with me to my right is Blanche Sherman, CAT's Chief Financial Officer. Today, I'm going to give you a quick look back at FY22 and the challenges and opportunities brought about by the pandemic and the change in daily commuting patterns that has impacted demand for public transit services. Pandemic fatigue and the increased competition for manpower in the labor market has brought about staffing shortages. But our focus going into FY23 will center on the implementation of the CATS battery electric bus pilot program and continuing preliminary design and engineering for the Silver Line. Going back on that look back over the last year, significant loss of demand for public transit services due to quarantine, social distancing, and remote working resulted in an immediate and significant loss of ridership across all modes of CATS service offerings. From the outset of the pandemic, CATS immediately adjusted service levels to match demand. This also allowed us to implement initiatives to help protect our workforce. Things like on and off work weeks and social distancing aboard our buses and trains. Ridership continues to increase year over year slowly. However, until major businesses throughout the region return to some semblance of normalcy in regard to employees' return to the workplace, our ridership numbers will continue to underperform. Now, that being said, I do believe that transit is well positioned for ridership return. If we take a look at a snapshot of large event utilization of our service, I think we get a glimpse of what the future will hold. Whether it's Panther games during the fall or Hornets or Charlotte FC matches, when Charlotteans have a destination in Uptown, they've consistently and reliably chosen to use CAT's Blue and Gold Line rail services. And as Uptown businesses continue to open their doors for in-person workplace, I believe transit ridership will continue. Each schedule change since the fourth quarter of 2020, we have incrementally increased service levels on bus as demand has begun to revive. Rail service levels have remained steady during that time period at 20-minute intervals. However, just this week, we've adjusted Blue and Gold Line service levels to provide more frequent rail service on the Blue Line during the weekdays, as Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and other employers are reopening facilities for in-person work. This past Monday, the Blue Line began running 15-minute intervals rather than 20 minutes. In response to a tight labor market, CATS has increased its marketing and communications and outreach to fill open positions and generate interest in public transit as a career. CATS has also paid retention bonuses to frontline operating employees and work with RATP Dev, our bus contractor, to ensure their employees receive commensurate bonuses. Safety and security of employees and riders has been a hot topic as of late, and CATS continues to work with RATP Dev and the SMART Union on implementation of mutually agreed upon short and long-term strategies that will enhance the safety of our system, while at the same time providing additional training to our operators who are both current and new employees. We continue to track and measure our performance through our CATS Tracks, our performance measurement system. This scorecard is based upon 4 management principles: outstanding customer service, financial stewardship, employee success, and community impact. Paired with the Net Promoter Score and Customer Satisfaction Index, this program gives us a high-level snapshot of the performance of our performance based upon generating outcomes to our customers rather than just tracking outputs. And I'm proud that over the last 3 consecutive years, CATS has received industry-leading Net Promoter Scores from our customers, beating the industry average in the transit industry by over 31%. There are multiple metrics within each of the 4 strategy areas, as I mentioned. Each metric is assigned a performance goal, and we measure against that goal each quarter through statistical reporting, through our third-party provider that manages our scorecard and conducts our rider and employee surveys twice annually. However, recognizing the impact that the pandemic would have on several of our financial and operating metrics, CATS in FY22 adjusted its overall performance goal down from the normal 90 points to 85. Our final score was closer than we would have been more comfortable with in FY21, achieving an 85.3, but many of our financial metrics were specifically impacted by the pandemic. In FY21, CAT's overall customer satisfaction, as measured through our riders survey conducted in the 4th quarter of FY21, remained high. Even though ridership fell dramatically, CAT's customers were pleased with our initial response and ongoing efforts in regard to the pandemic. Having just received our 2nd quarter FY22 results depicted in the chart before you, it's clear that the pandemic continues to impact operations and manpower. And I'll just briefly go over a couple of the metrics that have been fallen below expectations. On-time performance dropped 9% during the 1st quarter as recruitment and retention issues continued to be a challenge for us, particularly in the bus operations area. Customers with access to 15-minute or better service also isn't meeting our goals, as funding to implement the Envision My Ride program that we developed in 2018 continues to be an ongoing challenge. However, employee bonuses and scheduling changes in our operations departments to allow for more flexibility for our frontline employees, programs like implementing 4-day, 10-hour work weeks, we believe will help reverse this trend from an employee success standpoint. And then in the financial stability area, taxpayer subsidies metric and customers per revenue hour have obviously been impacted by the declines in our fare revenue due to overall ridership declines brought about by the pandemic. Good news on the horizon, our contractor just completed our latest customer survey in the field. This is the first time that our surveyor has had in-person face-to-face surveys with our customers, and we are awaiting those customer satisfaction and Net Promoter Scores and should have that within the next month or so. And so we'll be back to you to let you know how we fared from a customer satisfaction and Net Promoter Score standpoint. CATS will be presenting a balanced budget for FY23 with no fare increase. The budget will increase from $185.8 million in FY22 to $205.6 million in FY23. Several line items have significantly increased since last year, with the first full year of Gold Line Phase 2 operations. An additional administrative positions and merit increases CATS personnel. The service line item will also increase by $8.1 million. And Phase 1 of our midlife overhaul for our Blue Line South Corridor vehicles, which began service in 2007, will commence, this year, which will raise our vehicle and track maintenance line item by $7.1 million. Other operating expenses include additional security enhancements that I mentioned earlier, as requested by our outreach and discussions with the Smart Union, which will raise that line item by $5.1 million. On the revenue side, sales tax continues to overperform, thereby increasing CAT's trend line, and fare revenue continue to be impacted by ridership losses, But however, with the inflow of federal dollars, CATS has shifted funds from operating assistance into non-operating revenue to gain flexibility in our use of those funds. Looking at our capital program from FY23 to 27, CAT's focus will continue to be on maintaining a state of good repair, replacing an aging bus fleet as we continue our conversion to battery electric bus, and enhancements to our facilities, making improvements to support that transition to more sustainable technology. Our continued investment in security upgrades at our facilities, the ongoing construction of our Handbright Park and Ride in Huntersville, and transitioning, acquiring additional non-revenue vehicle replacements to support our mobility efforts. Mr. Chairman, that'll conclude my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, and I'll go first to the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. When you mentioned the funding for Envision My Ride, has there been any changes to the program such that you're looking at some of the routes that don't have as much ridership even before COVID, like taking COVID out of the equation, changing some of those routes or using a smaller bus?
So two things. Envision My Ride, as mentioned, that program rolled out in 2018, identified those routes that were underperforming from a customer satisfaction and expectation. Those routes that are greater than 30 minutes, headways and frequencies. At that time, in 2018, 22 of our routes operated on frequencies that were greater than 45 minutes, and a number of those routes are even greater than 60 minutes. We have tried over the last 3 years with very limited financial resources under the current half-cent sales tax to make some incremental adjustments to that service. We've been able to add additional frequencies on a handful of routes, but we still have a large majority of our routes that have service frequencies that I think our customers and many looking from the outside would say doesn't meet the expectations nor the size of a growing city such as Charlotte. Since the pandemic, however, we have been reallocating resources, bus frequencies to those routes that continue to have high ridership during the pandemic and supported frontline employees, and their destination to hospitals, medical facilities, and other important services that continue to operate during the pandemic. But the reality of the Envision My Ride is without a new funding source, we will not be able to meet the goals outlined in that plan. And although I'm very encouraged by the discussions that are happening in regard to additional funding sources for transportation, with the current half-cent sales tax, is just not going to support the implementation of that plan.
Well, I guess my question really was because of that limit on additional funding sources, has there been adjustments to Envision My Ride so that you're taking out routes or finding different ways to service those customers? I know, like in Wilson, North Carolina, when we were at the Transportation Summit, they talked about that they kind of developed their own Uber system for some of, well, I think that's what they use instead of a bus system. But I'm just thinking how, are there any innovative ways to address lack of demand in some areas so that you can make up for, the busiest routes that need more service?
In regard to making use of transportation networking entities such as Uber and Lyft, CATS has had 2 programs in the University City area and in the North End Smart District. We have partnered with Lyft to provide those kinds of innovative first and last mile connections. and we'll continue to look for other opportunities to find out of the box solutions to mobility challenges. But in regard to those low-frequency routes, that continues to be an ongoing problem for CATS, and anything outside of additional buses and operators and adding more frequency to those routes, I think is just going to fall short of the mark. We always evaluate the ridership, the ongoing ridership and efficiency of our routes. And as I mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, we've made multiple adjustments to routes to pull service away from routes that are underperforming from a ridership standpoint and reinvesting that in routes that have continued to have high demand for transit service.
Okay, and then I just have two other questions, and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. One is if you could give us an update on where we are with the app, and then secondly, on the real-time app, and then secondly, given the increase in gasoline prices right now, has there been any consideration for perhaps maybe marketing CATS by giving people reduced bus fares or even free bus fares for a while, just to sort of attract people that, for so long really didn't have much of a financial incentive to ride the bus?
So to your first question, the CATS Pass app for the real-time app has been in operation since early last fall. We have over 50,000 customers who have downloaded the app and use it on a daily basis. And our app has received a very high score in the App Store, having a 4.8 score out of 5. Right now, our efforts are to continue to tweak the bus real-time app as we're hearing feedback from our customers, particularly in nomenclature and how we describe where the status of our vehicles are. Getting customers to also, from a marketing standpoint, to realize that the old app does not have real-time GPS technology that our new app does, and continuing to get customers who are erroneously still using the old app to transition to the new app. And we have a marketing effort through social media and our website, not only to make sure that our customers understand the new capabilities, but also provide tutorials on how to use the new app. We are currently now working on transitioning, adding our train real-time function, and that should come online later this spring. Also, other functionalities such as fare capping will come on later this spring or early summer. Fare capping is something that we are very excited about from an equity standpoint. One of the things that has always been an impediment to our ridership is the fact that so many of our cash-paying customers have to make decisions on a daily basis on how often they use that service, because the cost of the service could be an impediment. And so by utilizing this new technology, once a cash payer reaches the value of a monthly fare, which generally, if you're taking one round trip each day, you will hit that sometime in week 3. The rest of your transit trips will be fare-free, as if you had bought a monthly pass at the beginning of the month. You're no longer outlaying cash payments for your ride. So we're excited about that. And your third question, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, if you wouldn't mind repeating that last question again.
Those other two questions about reduced or free fares during this gasoline crisis and the status of the app. Because I'm going to have to figure out which app I have, because the other day I tried to use it for the light rail and it didn't have the light rail on it. It was only the bus system.
Right.
So it's possible I don't have the right app.
No, you have the right app. We have not turned on the light rail real time just yet. That will be coming later this spring. The app only has real-time information for our bus system.
Okay.
In regard to fare-free service, I would say that you will remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we went into a fare-free mode for a couple of months, and then went back to fares as we received more information and more PPE was made available. I will say we did not see a drop-off in our ridership then, and so I think that leads to believe that ridership issues are more about virtual workplace and destinations, employment centers being open than it is about the cost of our service. Our bus ridership continues to increase and has done so, albeit slowly over the last year. And so we can always look to find ways of offsetting the impact of our fares to those who are of low income, where the fares are a challenge, without giving those who are receiving benefits from their employers, et cetera, another, I would say, another benefit for those that can afford. I think we need to find ways to focus efforts on those who have financial impediments to our service.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lewis.
So, Ms. Hachmira,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Driggs. Some of my questions have already been addressed. I would like to understand the COVID dollars and how they were used to address some of the issues we have seen recently around reliability. Mr. Lewis, if you could provide that information as part of our follow-up report, that would be great.
Thank you. Will do, Councilman.
is that it, Ms. Hachmira?
Yes, that's all I have. Thank you.
So, Mr. Lewis, in that vein, I would be interested to see a breakdown of the revenue. So I know you have a fare box collection component, you've got the maintenance of effort. So can we see those numbers broken out against this total revenue line that you've got on slide 6?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And then I have, do I have any other hands up? Committee, anybody else?
Yeah, I got my hand up. I had a question. Mr. Lewis, do we have any, I don't know, a breakdown of what the most productive routes are or what the ones that are underperforming? And I was wondering, does the 11U and Hidden Valley bus, that's the main Hidden Valley line, and the 211 bus, are they still top performers in terms of ridership?
Sure. If you are going to define top performers as how many people are riding, those routes you mentioned, I would say, are in our top 1/3, 1/4 actually of our system. And we do rank all of our routes. As I mentioned earlier, we do each year do an annual performance evaluation of all of our service in order to make any necessary tweaks that may bring the ridership of a route up, or in some cases, if none of those efforts work, we will make recommendations to end a route. And so I can provide to the committee the rankings from a ridership standpoint.
Hold on one second. Hey,
Mr. Phipps, can you hear me?
hold on one second. Studio, can you go to a pause screen, please?
are. Good, and we're back on air, right?
Okay, yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
Good, so why don't we resume? I think Mr. Phipps, you had a question?
Yeah, I think Mr. Lewis was in the process of answering it. I had wondered whether or not we had any metrics on the I guess the routes with the most ridership compared to those that are underperforming. And
Right,
you indicated
right.
that the 11U and the 211 buses over at Hidden Valley was still within the top third of rideability and service.
So, Mr. Phipps, were you once the district council person for that area?
But of course, yes.
It's a real insider
And I've
knowledge.
ridden those buses a couple of times, so I was just curious as to still see if they were still performing, service level was still up to par, so.
Well, Mr. Phipps, I would say they're still overperforming, they're still in the higher performing, but all of our bus routes are underperforming compared to pre-pandemic. But we do have a ranking of all those, and I will provide that to the committee members.
Thank
I think
you.
it's good that Mr. Phipps is proud of the bus routes in his old district. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
So, do we have, are we now basically done? Does anybody have any questions? John, I'd asked you for that revenue breakdown, and I think with that, we're ready to move on to our next topic.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And so now we have aviation.
Good afternoon, Chairman Driggs and Vice Chair Ajmera. It's good to be with you and all the other council members on the call this afternoon. In the interest of time, I will try to go rather quickly through this so we can stay on schedule. Next slide, please.
And this is Miss Gentry speaking. Haley, just in case people don't remember the introductions.
Yes, sir. I apologize. It's Haley Gentry, Chief Executive Officer for the airport, and we also have Mike Hill, the airport CFO, on the call with us as well.
Thank you.
So let's start off with some of the basics. These are numbers that many of you are very familiar with, so I won't spend much time on this. I will highlight just a couple of things on this slide. We ended the year of 2021 calendar year with 43 million passengers. That is not our normal level. That is a post-pandemic level at about 87% of calendar year 19 numbers. Nothing to sneeze at. We're very pleased with that. As I said, at about 87% of our regular numbers. Additionally, I point out the economic impact of the airport itself. This is a dated number, but we still feel very confident in it. It's about 25 million, which translates to 4% of the state's gross product. I'd also remind you that we are American Airlines' second largest hub, and of course, that has been a driving force for us during the pandemic recovery. Next slide.
Could you comment
Yes, sir.
on how far traffic dropped off during the depths of COVID? What was
Well, yes. The previous year of COVID, we ended the year at 27 million numbers. 27 million passengers. So our numbers were considerably improved this past year. And if you look at our numbers on a fiscal basis, we have just surpassed 100%. We have just surpassed 97%, and our projections have us going for FY23 at 101% of 2019 numbers. So we are very much on target and exceeding what's happening in many of the markets across the country. Just to refresh your memory, we have 6 strategic principles that we follow at the airport: safety and security, strategic growth, strong partnerships, asset preservation, valuing our employees, and customer focus. And we have taken the budget this year and drilled down onto several initiatives within each of these, so you can see those as our priority areas beneath each strategic principle. These are posted across our campus. These are things that we use when we're making business decisions, and this is how we evaluate our budget as we're moving forward. Does it meet this criteria? Are we staying true to our mission and our vision? All right, let's jump right into the meat of the matter. As you can see here, these we like to lead with good news. So we've got revenues on top. And the good news is revenues are stronger than ever. You will see a 27% increase over last year's revenues. And we'll talk a little bit about where that's coming from in a minute. And you will see a 16% increase in our recommended budget moving forward. Most of what you're seeing there, 85% of that increased budget, is due to contractual growth, inflation, merit raises for our employees, and the cost of fuel. I'd like to remind you that we are a fuel reseller. We operate our FBO, so we sell jet fuel and avgas, and it is tremendous what is happening in the general aviation and corporate aviation sector of our business. So we have $8 million increased just specifically for fuel over at the FBO. And that translates into about twice as much in revenues in terms of a return. In addition to what you're seeing here, you'll see that there are 45 additional positions that are requested. That is really returning our operating levels back to normal pre-pandemic levels and putting programs in place to support the operation that were tabled over the last 2 years. This slide has been very popular and we've used it a lot in various financial conversations, but I think, you know, the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This tells you everything you need to know about our recovery. If you look at the red line, that is the average of all U.S. Domestic employments during March 20th, when the pandemic really hit the industry, through the end of this last calendar year. If you look at the blue line, that's Charlotte. And you can see we have been trending above the entire pandemic, what was happening throughout the country. This activity, really based on the strength of the hub, has created quite a strong foundation for us to go into this next financial year. If you look at September 21, you see we've peaked there, and that is at 101% of our norms for 2019. So we are back, and that really is based on the strength of the hub and the fact that American really doubled down on Dallas and Charlotte. They made that well known, and they have continued to support that. These are domestic only numbers. If we were to put international in there, you would see some variation. So we took our 6 strategic principles and we broke it down to where the bulk of our operational money is going to be spent this year. And what you're looking at here is a summary of that information. A couple of things I would draw your attention to. We talked about the FBO and the fuel sales. If you look under strong partnerships, you'll see $8.4 million. That is the fuel increase that I was mentioning to you. That's where you'll see that show up in our budget. And to give you some anecdotal information, last fiscal year, we spent $4.4 million on fuel purchases. This year, we're budgeting $5.6 million. So the demand is just tremendous. Although corporations may not be putting their folks fully on airplanes yet, they are certainly flying their own private aircraft. And we have new additional tenants there. It really speaks to the growth of our community as well. I'd also point out to you 5.9 in safety and security. These are basic functions that we have, police, fire, medic, traffic management. All of those things are about returning the operation to normal post-pandemic levels. As I said, there was a decrease in all of those areas that was relatable to our level of traffic, and you'll see that is back stronger than ever. And of course, always wanting to value our employees. A tremendous amount of investment in our employees during COVID, looking to do creative things with recruitment and retention, and of course, a very strong workforce development and employee training initiative that I'll give credit to Brent. He was highly instrumental in starting that, and very wise, looking to the future for how we can be an employer of choice and how we can maintain our employees. I'll be glad to answer any questions. I know that was very brief, but I did want to allow you a few minutes at the end.
So I don't see hands up. Committee, any questions? I'll ask one. Do we have that graph of the cost per enplaned passenger that we've seen in the past?
We do. I don't have that with me, but I can tell you that we wound up ending out this last fiscal year at $1.67, which is just incredible. We were recently, well, just this week, I've just returned. We were in New York, Mike and I, and the Atlanta director had a good laugh at our number, and he said, "I'm going to get to a $2 CPE." And then he said he was going to have to close half his facilities. So I can tell you that we are still the lowest in the nation. I'd be glad to provide you that updated chart if you'd like that for your own information, but we don't have it available today.
And Mr. Driggs, this is Mr. Cagle. Aviation did provide, and it is in your hard copy packet, an aviation FY 2023 budget overview. On the first page, there is the chart that Ms. Gentry is referring to.
Right, I think
Thank
it'd be
you,
good for the workshop if we have that in the deck that we talk about with the full council. My other question was the concessions at the airport. What can we say about their recovery? They went through a bad time. We had some money that we were able to allocate, or some accommodation we would be able to make for them. But what's their situation now?
Concessionaires are doing fairly well. Employment has been an issue for many of them. I would say 95% of our concessions are open. Some of them do have reduced hours during the day. For example, if you were normally open till 9, you may be closing at 8 now. They are trying to use the staffing that they have to maximize the coverage during the day. Financially, they are doing fantastic. They are back just like our numbers are. Their numbers are up. I will tell you that they are still experiencing the good fortune of the federal funds that came through. As you recall, we received about $350 million in federal stimulus funds between the CRISA, ARPA, CARES funds. A portion of that was designated for locally owned concessions and concessionaires, and they are still benefiting from that as we speak. We're essentially paying ourselves to pay their rent to cover that based on how the federal prescription for that is in terms of implementing the program. So they're doing very well, and those funds have been instrumental in supporting their recovery.
So there haven't been many casualties of the small business concessionaires at the airport, or how did that play out? Because a number of them were in pretty dire straits.
We have not lost any of our small business. I can tell you there are a couple of international partners that were company stores from our food provider who internationally have not recovered and may be changing brands in Charlotte because of that. But supply chain issues continue to plague all of our vendors. I think that is something that is across the board. But in terms of financial loss, I'm happy to report that all of our small businesses have maintained their position at the airport.
Good. I guess the only other question I had then was staffing. We've heard from CATS about, and everywhere, frankly, about labor shortages. So are you encountering those difficulties?
Yes, sir. We are experiencing a challenge with our labor and trades teams. It is very challenging in this environment to hire labor and trades employees. We have a lot of specialty employees that deal with things like conveyor belts and baggage systems, jetways. Those are challenging to hire. And then, of course, very much like you've heard from other departments, people who hold a CDL to run our shuttle bus operation, that is challenging as well. So we do have a number of vacancies. I think we are working very closely with the city's HR department on creative solutions, and are doing things we haven't done before. And I look forward to even newer ideas that may come through the budget process that will support the organization.
And last thing from me, I appreciate the brevity of this presentation. Maybe a quick look at the capital program, because I know you've got, I think, a larger program of $4 billion or something, and then there's a nearer term capital plan that's been agreed with the airline, just to get a feel for where we stand with that. Not now, but Otherwise, Mr. Phipps, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, with regard to passenger and airport staff safety, I know that we've heard some reports on about disruptive behavior on flights. Did we ever get any summary of the number of incidents that occurred at our airport and the overall disposition of those kinds of incidents?
Mr. Phipps, I have not seen the numbers tallied in the manner that you are asking for, but we could work with the police department to get some of that information. They would be the party who holds that level of detail. I can tell you that that has been an ongoing issue, and we have worked very closely with the police department as well as our tenants and the local district attorney's office. We've met several times to try and bring awareness to what was happening in our environment. It seems to have calmed down the past few months. I think when the mask mandate, if the mask mandate goes away, I'm saying when because that is what we're hearing. When the mask mandate goes away, I think that will help. It has put a lot of employees in an enforcement position, whether they're in the airplane or at the gate, and it has it's been very difficult. But those numbers would have to come from the police department, and we can follow up offline if you would like those.
Thank you.
Good. If there are no other questions, Ms. Gentry, thank you. The airport remains a jewel in our crown, and we appreciate you and your entire team. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your support.
So with that, I think we're done with our agenda. I would say, Mr. Bergman, we didn't talk on any of these about compensation issues and things like that for employees of the enterprise funds. I'm assuming that you will incorporate that into a discussion for our general fund, or how are we going to address that?
Yeah, so we dedicated the first workshop to talk about some of these same problems that enterprise funds are facing around attraction and retention. And over the last few months, we have talked extensively with the enterprise funds about a citywide solution, not a general fund solution. So when we have a proposed budget on May 2nd, everything will work together to try to provide a citywide package to address some of these needs.
Okay. Otherwise, if there's nothing from members of the committee, Mr. Cagle, do you have anything else for us?
No, sir.
Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, please hang up.